We'll go to page chapter 31, fiscal policy. So when we talk about fiscal policy is the use of taxation or government subsidy to correct the economy. So government uses fiscal policy to manipulate the economy or to control the economy. So let's go down. I think you understand the introduction, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll go to policy instruments. It said the government can use a number of tools to help achieve its macroeconomic objectives. What are macroeconomic objectives? These are ways in which the government wants to ensure that unemployment is reduced. Growth is happening. That means output in the country is increasing. Government wants to ensure that inflation rate is falling. Do you understand? These are macroeconomic objectives. All these objectives, government must achieve them because that is the reason why they are there. Do you get my point?
Yeah.
So one of the ways in which government would try to control or correct this market failure is through policy instruments. So one of them is the fiscal policy.
Yeah.
So they said here, the government can use a tool or number of tools to help achieve its macroeconomic objectives. These are called policy instruments. Policy instruments are economic variables such as rate of interest, rate of taxation, level of government expenditure. The government can adjust them directly or indirectly. Changes in policy instruments can affect other variables in the economy, such as the aggregate demand, inflation, unemployment, and GDP. Because these are the things government wants to make sure are working well. The aggregate demand in the economy, they want it to increase. Inflation, government wants it to reduce.
Yeah.
GDP, government wants it to increase. Unemployment, government wants it as low as it's possible. So, fiscal policy. One important policy instrument is fiscal policy. This involves adjusting levels of government expenditure, which is subsidy. Government expenditure is what? Subsidy. And taxation to influence aggregate demand in the economy. Fiscal policy can be used to influence the behavior of firms and individuals. For example, many government places heavy taxes on cigarettes to discourage consumption of these harmful products. Cigarettes is a demerit good, so it could cause harm to the health. As a result, government will decrease the taxes on it to reduce the consumption.
Yeah.
So government, it's a market failure. The production of cigarettes is a market failure. So government wants to correct this market failure through policy instruments like fiscal policy. So because the production of cigarettes would bring negative externality, government will use taxes to reduce it. But if it's a product that will bring a positive externality, government will use subsidies to increase the consumption. Do you get the point?
Yeah.
So every year the government plans, the next paragraph, every year the government plans how much it's going to spend on each category of expenditure, which is subsidy. The government also shows how the money is going to be raised and state how much it's planned to borrow. These plans are published in the government's budget. So the budget is the financial plan of the government on revenue and expenditure. Do you understand what the budget is here?
Yeah.
So we go down. Government revenue. So the main source of revenue of government is taxation. I told you in chapter 30 that the main source of government doesn't have money anywhere. The source of government is through taxes. That means the most source of government revenue is taxes. So the government all over the world impose taxation on for the following reasons. Number one, to pay for public sector services. Those that are working for government, they have to be paid, yes or no?
Yeah.
So government will get this done by imposing tax on individuals, on firms, profits, on importation. Two, to discourage certain activities. For example, in some countries, taxes are imposed on cigarettes to discourage the consumption. There's also tax on dumping rubbishes in landfill sites. This is to encourage everyone to reduce waste. So government would impose taxes based on this reason. The third one, taxes can be used to help control aggregate demand in the economy. This is discussed in more detail. So what is aggregate demand? Aggregate demand is the sum of total demand in the economy. The sum of the total demand of the economy is called aggregate demand. So if government wants to control aggregate demand, government can impose tax. Because an increase in aggregate demand will lead to inflation. Yes. So for government to reduce inflation, government could decrease taxation. So when taxes increase, what happens? The purchasing power of individuals will fall. The aggregate demand will fall. Is it clear? Is it clear, please?
Yeah.
And the last one, the distribution of wealth in the economy can be made fairer. So when government wants to try to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, government could use taxation. That is government revenue. Any question about that?
No.
So we have direct taxes. Why do we call them direct taxes? We call them direct taxes because they are levied on income. Example of direct tax is corporation tax, taxes on profits. Another example of direct tax is income tax. The tax I pay on my salary is a direct tax. Do we understand?
Yeah.
So here it said, most government taxes fall into two categories, the direct and the indirect. For direct, I explained income tax already, right?
Yeah.
I explained corporation tax already. Then we have the social insurance tax. These they are imposed on people's income. However, the money collected is used especially for pensions, benefits, and healthcare. So for social insurance taxing, they get it from individuals. They use it to pay their pensions or benefits. Then we have the capital gain tax. Here, the tax you pay because you make profit on the sales of assets. We call it capital gain tax. In football, it is in football, so they call it capital gain tax. You are able to sell a football player.
Yeah.
The capital gain, it's a capital gain. If you sell more than, maybe you bought Brozovic for 30 million, and you're selling Brozovic for maybe 45 million. So there's a capital gain of 15 million. So you pay tax on that capital gain. Yeah. Because players are the assets of the club. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
Any question about that? So all this tax, and the last one is inheritance tax. Whatever you get, maybe through the will of your grandparents, your dad has certain portion of the property. The tax it pays on is inheritance tax. It's direct.
So even money you pay for inheritance, you pay tax.
You pay tax? Yes, it's money you pay tax on.
Well, it doesn't work.
Yeah, but it's a policy. So it might not work in some countries. Not all countries. So it depends. But we just have to understand that there's income tax, and there's inheritance tax, there's social tax, social insurance tax, there's capital gain tax, and there's corporation tax. These are categories of direct tax. Is it clear? Yeah. So go to indirect tax. Why do we call it indirect tax? We call it indirect tax because it is charged on consumption. Do you get the point?
Yeah.
So here it says any tax on spending is an indirect tax, which is spending the same as what? Consumption, right? Right?
Yeah.
So some of the main indirect taxes are sales tax. Taxes on spending is an indirect tax. Duties is an indirect tax. Custom duties, indirect tax. Council tax. All these are indirect taxes.
Not necessarily about money, right? Or is it?
It's money.
It's money.
You pay tax. These taxes will be based on your product on consumption.
Yeah.
Like the custom duty. Okay, let me start with an example. I sent my iPhone X, I sent it to my younger brother. He has to pay custom duty on it. Mm-hmm. Do you understand? So that's indirect tax. Because the tax is not paid by me, it's paid by him. Do you get the point? If the tax is paid by me, it's direct. But he's going to be he's the one taking the product. So he's going to pay the tax to the Nigerian government. Is it clear? We move on. We have environmental taxes. These are taxes imposed to ensure that the environment is in good state for sustainable development. Landfill tax, climate change levies are used to help countries. Aggregate levy, tax on sand, gravel, rock. These are taxes for the environment. They are all indirect taxes. They are indirect taxes too. Is it clear? Yeah. We move on. So we go to government expenditure. Okay. So government expenditure implies to government spending. So government revenue comes through taxes. Government expenditure means government now is spending through subsidy. Do you get my point?
Yeah.
Right. So example, okay, let's see what they wrote here for them. They said, okay, yeah, the total planned expenditure and the amounts to be spent on each category is announced every year in the budget. Remember I said, the budget talks about the total amount of revenue government is expecting and the total amount of expenditure government is going to spend, is expected to spend. during the year. I think that is clear.
Yeah.
So we go to fiscal deficit and fiscal surpluses. In most years, when the government plans to spend more than they receive in tax revenue, so the result is a fiscal deficit. So if government taxes, if revenue on taxes is more than the, if revenue on taxes is more than, if revenue in taxes is more than expenditure, it is fiscal surplus. But if government spending is more than the revenue it makes from taxes, it's fiscal deficit. Is it clear?
Yes.
Between fiscal deficit and fiscal surplus.
Yeah.
Fiscal deficit means that spending exceeds revenue. Fiscal surplus means spending with revenue or expenditure. Surplus means revenue exceeds spending or expenditure. Is it clear?
Yeah.
All right. Now let's go to the impact of a fiscal deficit and a fiscal surplus. Over a long period of time, most governments will prefer to avoid running a fiscal deficit. In a year, when the government plans to overspend, it will have to borrow money to fund the deficit. Consequently, if deficit builds up over a period of time, the national debt gets bigger. So the problem about having if national debt gets bigger,
yeah.
Well, will it really cause inflation? The point is this: government is spending. If government is spending, it means consumption. Yes, it will lead to aggregate demand increasing. Yeah, it will lead to inflation. But the first thing is that government has to solve this problem. And how will government be able to solve this fiscal deficit problem? Government might need to increase taxation or cut spending. Because at that point in time, government has to borrow to cover up for the debts.
Yeah.
So if the fiscal the point is that if the fiscal deficit is increasing in the country, it increases the debt of the country. Do you get the point?
Yeah.
Therefore, fiscal surplus. The impact of fiscal surplus is likely to be positive. If government collects more revenue than it spends in a year, the surplus could be used in different ways. One, it could be used to spend on the future provision of public services or used to lower taxes in the economy. Yeah. So, if government is receiving more taxes revenue, government can start reducing taxes because as a result of that. And that's a benefit. Government might increase public spending by spending on infrastructure.
Yeah.
By spending on infrastructure. Do you understand? So that's the impact of deficit and surplus. Any questions about that? So go to the impact of fiscal policy on macroeconomic objectives. We said macroeconomic objectives are reducing inflation, stabilizing inflation, a stable inflation rate. That means price stability, low unemployment, economic growth, increase in aggregate demand. In GDP, yes, increase in GDP. So how will fiscal policy help government to achieve all these macroeconomic objectives? Then fiscal policy is also used to influence aggregate demand in the economy. In some years, a government may increase the size of the budget deficit or reduce the surplus by spending more or taxing less. To stimulate the economy, this is called expansionary fiscal policy. So if government wants to increase aggregate demand, government will use expansionary fiscal policy. Are you with me?
Yeah.
If government wants to increase aggregate demand in the economy, government will do what? Use expansionary fiscal policy. So for expansionary fiscal policy, this means people will be able to spend. That will come through maybe subsidy or reducing taxes. So increasing subsidy is an expansionary fiscal policy. Reducing taxes is also an expansionary fiscal policy. Okay. Do you get the point here, please? If government wants to increase aggregate demand in the economy, government can use expansionary fiscal policy, which is increasing subsidy or lowering taxes. Either ways, income will increase. The spending power will be high. Is it clear? Then, if government wants to reduce aggregate demand, maybe because they foresee inflation, government will increase in taxation and reduction in subsidy. Contractual fiscal policy.
So we can understand from the name, start with
Expansionary, contractionary. Is it clear, please? So, inflation. It said contractionary fiscal policy can be used to reduce inflation. We talked about that already, right? So, for economic growth, if government wants to increase the economy, if government wants the economy to grow, government can use expansionary fiscal policy. How? Because at that point in time, aggregate demand would have increased through subsidy or lowering taxes. Either ways, when there's subsidy, consumer purchasing power would rise.
income would rise.
Income will rise. Yeah, that's consumer purchasing power. That means businesses will be able to generate more revenue. They'll be able to increase their output. Then the economy will grow. If government reduces taxes, businesses will be able to make more profit, will be able to expand their business. So they will be able to lower prices, and consumers will be able to buy at affordable prices, increasing revenue also for firms.
Yeah.
So that's economic growth. Then we go to unemployment. Expansionary fiscal policy can help to reduce unemployment. Again, increases income expenditure and tax cuts can help to stimulate demand. To meet this extra demand, firms will have to produce more. This means more staff will be taken on and unemployment will fall. So for governments to reduce unemployment in the economy, government can use expansionary fiscal policy. But if government uses expansionary fiscal policy to reduce unemployment, because there's one thing is this, there's a positive relationship. There is what we call inverse relationship between employment and inflation. So if an economy wants to reduce inflation, it must encourage unemployment. But unemployment is bad, yes or no?
Yeah.
So why do we say this? If employment rate increases in the economy, it increases the level of income, yes or no? If employment increases, if employment increases, it increases the level of income, yes or no?
Yeah.
So if the level of income increases, what happens to aggregate demand? It will increase. And what happens? Inflation. So that's why there's inverse relationship between employment and unemployment and inflation. So, but if government wants to solve unemployment in the economy, government must use expansionary fiscal policy. Because at that point in time, government will spend more. Do you get it?
Yeah.
Government will be spending more. So if government is spending more, firms will be able to reduce their cost, allowing them to increase their output by employing more workers. Put that place.
Okay.
Do you get the point? Then the third point, current account deficit. Fiscal policy might be used to help influence the balance of the current account. For example, if there's a large deficit on the current account, contractional fiscal policy will help reduce aggregate demand. This will help to reduce the demand for imports. So if there is current account deficit will be as a result of import exceeding export. Are you getting the point?
Yeah.
If people are importing more than export, the balance of payment will be on deficit. Do you get the point?
Yeah.
So for government to reduce this balance of payment deficit, government must use contractionary fiscal policy. So government might choose increase in import tariff. So tariffs increases. So if tariffs increases, the price of importation increases. The consumers will reduce demand for imported products, and that will stimulate the balance of payment. Do you get it?
Yes.
So if a country is witnessing a negative current account deficit, if a country is witnessing a current account deficit, it can use contractional fiscal policy to stimulate it. Is it clear?
Yes.
Then we go to fiscal policy and the environment. They said, more recently, government have used fiscal policies to tackle environmental problems. For example, taxes such as landfill tax, the climate change levy, and the aggregate levy have been used to help reduce environmental damage. These are explained above. Some government also use subsidies to encourage activities that are environmentally friendly. So if government feels like, oh, these activities are going to cause damage to the environment, government will increase taxes, contractional fiscal policy to discourage those activities. But if government feels that this activity of companies or firms is going to be helpful to the environment, government will subsidize. Is it clear? Any question about that? So that's the end of fiscal policy. Thank you.